Greetings, everyone, and welcome to Aspen Institute and to our wonderful program here at the Religion and Society program, Religious Perspectives. My name is the Reverend Dr. Audrey Price, and I'm the Deputy Director of the program. I also lead our Racial Justice and Religion Initiative, of which our Racial Justice and Religion Collective is a huge contributor. Narratives help us understand the world. They shape our identities, our aspirations, and our sense of purpose. They can offer or preclude hope, and we need narratives of America that are honest about our history and about our current conditions. We need narratives that are inclusive, empowering, and forward-looking. We need narratives that help us to find a common cause across differences and to build a shared vision of the future. In our wonderful and blessed partnership with the United States Bahá'í Office of Public Affairs, we are releasing religious perspectives on the narratives of America. The search for a just, honest, inclusive, and forward-looking tellings, edited by myself and my colleague, Selvi. Before we start into that moment, however, I would like to pause in a moment of silence as we recognize two important observances this week. First, the religious holiday of Eid Adha, and also on Wednesday, Juneteenth. So let us have a moment of silence. The Aspen Institute also acknowledges and honors the fact that the Anacostan, the Piscataway tribe, and all indigenous people on whose ancestral homelands we gather and work in this space. We honor and recognize the enduring presence and resilience of indigenous peoples who have stewarded the land throughout generations. We acknowledge the ongoing legacy of colonization and the displacement of indigenous people from their traditional territories. We commit ourselves to learning from and working in partnership with indigenous communities to promote justice, equity, healing, and most importantly, to celebrate their resilience. May we strive to be thoughtful stewards of this land, fostering an understanding, respect, and solidarity with indigenous people, past, present, and future. We could not begin without acknowledging that we stand on a land that was inhabited before others came. Now I'd like to introduce to you my wonderful partner in this journey and in this publication to say a little bit more about how this work came into being. Selvi from the United States Baha'i Office of Public Affairs.
Thank you, Dr. Price, and thank you everyone for being here with us. Thank you for taking the time to join us for the release of this project. I would especially like to thank Dr. Price and Ekemini Uwan, who we've worked so closely with for the last few months on this project, and to thank the rest of the Aspen team that's helped with today, arranging today. And from the Office of Public Affairs, I would like to mention PJ Andrews, who's our new director for public discourse, and other members of our office that are here today, Anthony Vance and Rachel Wolf, Matt Cotton, and Lucia Tyson. Thank you, everyone, for helping. Our office has been so delighted to collaborate with the Religion and Society program and the Racial Justice and Religion Collective, and with the other authors that were involved, and the organizations that they serve with. It's been a real pleasure to think about these things together. There is a lot of narrative work that's going on in the public discourse, and particularly as we are approaching the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, it's very likely that our attention to questions related to narratives of our country will intensify. And our offices and our colleagues together, we've been particularly interested in how the different narratives relate to each other, the connective tissue between the narratives. How can we see different narratives as mutually enriching threads in a coherent tapestry? As we observe the discourse, we see that people are responding to the narrative work that's being done in different ways. A narrative, the same narrative that can feel liberating or healing to one person, can generate resistance in another person. And as we have been trying to understand this, one of the possibilities is that very important historical narratives that need to be told can sometimes feel to some people as if they are projecting intentions or roles taken from a historical context onto groups today in ways that don't necessarily elevate the capacity of those groups to contribute to our shared well-being. And this might feel as if it has brought us to an impasse, but we don't think so. We think that it's a call to ask more questions and to expand the circle of conversation about the narratives of America. One of the ideas that has been discussed in the project, the Narratives of America project, has been the interplay between narrative work and other dimensions of the broader process of social transformation, with the idea that perhaps as a process of social transformation unfolds, receptivity to challenging narratives increases over time, but that different narratives are needed at different points in that process to serve whatever needs the process has at any given time. And so we feel that this calls us to give attention to gaps that we might see in the narrative landscape. So while the beautiful work that's already happening continues and effloresces, we also hope that some of us can begin to think about additional questions like what narratives are needed to serve as entry points to more sustained conversations, or what narratives could help us bridge gaps between different worldviews and perspectives, and what are the narrative resources that we need to do this kind of work. And it is our conviction that religion is one potential source of ideas and inspiration for these narrative resources that are needed. We know that religion does not always contribute positively to social cohesion, we know this, but it can, and at its best, it can be very transformative. And so we're interested in learning how religious perspectives can enrich the broader conversation the broader conversation about social transformation without imposing religious beliefs on others, but at the same time, without restricting itself overly to the limitations imposed by dogmatic secularism. And so this volume shares a range of insights from our authors that are offered as a contribution to the narrative work. And you're going to hear directly from the authors this afternoon. But I'd like to just briefly mention a few themes that I've noticed that kind of weave within, through and across the essays. So one of them, not surprisingly, is the theme of our intrinsic interconnectedness. In some cases described through the divine within each person, or described as coming from a covenant that's been violated and needs to be healed. There were insights about knowing each other and the work that it takes to look for the divine within others, or the work that it takes to build relational work, or to do relational work, offering hospitality, inviting people into our homes, or creating spaces for connection, being in conversation with others, listening, prioritizing relationships as the basis for other work that we might be able to do together, standing shoulder to shoulder, building a mixed multitude, knowing the different tribes, expanding the circle of concern. These are some of the languages that people have used in the essays. There were insights about exploring the past, whether it was in order to recognize and bear witness to suffering that has occurred, or to connect to the resilience and the strength of ancestors and predecessors. And another insight was about the common truths that are shared by a plurality of religions, and that we can unite across differences for common cause. There was one more theme I'll mention, which was envisioning the future together, using imagination, and in conversation with others so that multiple perspectives help to inform our vision. So there are many rich ideas. We hope that you will be inspired reading them in the essays, and would really like to invite you also to respond to the questions that were posed to the authors. There's an opportunity to do that this afternoon, and you can do it later with a QR code that we'll share, but also within your own spheres of discourse and conversation, if you feel that you can bring these questions there and explore them with others. And we would love very much to just hear of any thoughts that are advancing, any ideas that come up through your work. So again, thank you so much for coming.
Okay, a couple things I neglected to say. I also want to welcome people who are watching virtually. So this is also being streamed out, and we had a number of people to also register who were out of town and to be watching virtually. So I want to acknowledge that. Also wanted to mention and give our deep gratitude as the Religion and Society program for the sponsorship of the Wayfarer Foundation, who has actually made this project possible. And I just ask Rich Havard, who is a great partner of ours, who has sponsored this program. And then lastly, as you see, there's a QR code that's up for the agenda for today that will remain up once you leave here, so that if you want to come back to any of the names or the points of contact from today's program, you're able to access that as well. And in this moment, I want to mention briefly, and then if he is with us later today, I will mention as well. But the Religion and Society program is extremely excited to announce that as of June 17th, 2024, we have gained a new executive director in the personhood of Josh Good. And Josh is doing his onboarding today process, so you know how that is. And so we might not have him the full time here, but if he's with us at our ending time, then Josh, you will have an opportunity to greet our guests. But I know you have a full schedule today. So I would like to bring up P.J. Andrews, who will moderate and walk us through our first set of readings. Today, as Selby mentioned, you will get to experience some of the essays that are in the publication in a variety of ways. You will hear from the authors through readings. We will also have a panel discussion and where you can ask questions and interact. And for those of you who are joining us virtually, we have made provisions for you to submit your questions, and we can raise that to the panelists or to the readers as well. P.J. Andrews.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. P.J. Andrews with the U.S. Bahá'í Office of Public Affairs. My pleasure to welcome up Caitlin Curtis and James Samimi Farr, who are two of the authors in this publication. And I think one of the things that stands out about this process to me is that it is an ongoing conversation. So I think what's at the heart of this are key questions that are essential to the question of what is the narrative of America that we seek? What is a narrative that is just, honest, forward-looking, and helping us to heal some of the wounds that we have, but also move forward together. And so then, no one person has this answer, but part of the magic of figuring this out is that we do it together, we do it in community. So one of the things that we've been emphasizing throughout the nature of the project that the Baha'i Office of Public Affairs is fostering, but then in our partnership with Aspen, is to really be in conversation with each other to create a sense of community in the work that we're doing as we go. And so it's really been a blessing for us to be able to create that. So even in the process of inviting everybody to contribute, we had sessions where they could become familiar with the project, ask questions, share concerns, adjust based on those things. And then we invited everyone to come to a retreat to sort of explore the questions together and think about, well, how am what I might be saying, how will that might be in conversation with you, who is coming from a different perspective. And then, we created a space where as people wrote, they could share their ideas as they evolved in writing with each other. And so I think there's a sense with this book project that the essays are in conversation together, that they're not separate from each other. They're not, one thing we could have done is just say, everybody write an essay and we'll put it together in a book and that's done. But we really wanted to create a space where there was sort of a shared experience in trying to answer these questions together. So practicing what we hope to see as part of the process of answering these questions in the larger community, in the larger nation, is a sense of community. And so with that, I just wanted to sort of offer that context of the voices that you're going to hear throughout the day, is that hopefully there's a sense of coherence among them too, that there is something connecting them. And what Selvi did very nicely was identify, she went through all the essays, and what are those connective tissues that might bond these different stories together and make them somewhat whole. So for the first portion of this program, of the bringing the readers up, Caitlin will read first, and then James will read, and their bios will be on the screen. So I'm introducing them by name, and then after they read, they'll join me here, and you guys will have a chance just for a few minutes to ask questions of them about their essays. So I'll welcome up Caitlin first, and then after Caitlin, James.
Bonjour, Caitlin Curtis and Dejin Gosbodawami and Dow. Hello, my name is Caitlin Curtis. I am a citizen of the Potawatomi Nation and so honored to be here with you. I am a poet storyteller, and so that's what I brought to this, is that embodiment of words and vision. And so I'm going to read you a poem today. And as I do, when I get to the poem, just settle in and take a deep breath and be present to this moment and this beautiful work that we're doing and embodying together. Storytelling and story sharing help us make sense of how we got here. What stories have been passed down, what stories have been buried deeply enough inside the bodies and the minds of the oppressed. So when we allow our stories to rise, we reclaim what has been lost or buried, and we find our way to one another as well. Story sharing is an active, embodied work, and it involves each of us and all of us. Story sharing is about both the individual and the collective, and as we do this work of naming the truth of our wounds, we bear witness to one another's stories and face the history that has not told the truth of who we are and how we got here. No matter what spiritual or cultural background we come from, the power of stories remains an important tool for us. But the work must be sustainable for it to last 7 generations, which means we have to slow down in a time when we feel like we need to speed up our own healing. What does it look like to pause, to breathe deeply, to hold space with one another and our stories, with the truth, and also to infuse action and art into our work moving forward? We must recognize that we need all of us, using the gifts we already have to imagine and create this better way. This means we tend to our wounds for the sake of those who came before us. We spend time with one another's wounds in the present, and we commit to healing for the sake of future generations. America is 250 years old, and instead of thinking of our own life in a linear way, how can we imagine circling back to the beginning of who we are? We must ask this not necessarily to recreate ourselves, but to examine the landscape that got us here and ask if we can imagine it anew. while casting a vision for an expansiveness we have yet to encounter on these lands. In our culture, we practice Manoba, which means living the good life, a life marked by care and compassion, by kinship and belonging. We all belong to one another. So asking who we are means asking how we can live that good life, walk in that good way that upholds and strengthens our connection to one another and Sigamakwe, Mother Earth. Just like we have taken the land and painted violence over it, we ask what stories remain, what lies at the foundation, and what we can build over what has already been built. This takes the work of editing, of paying attention, of telling the truth and celebrating the legacy of diversity that we are building right now. It means we tend to our garden, we tend to our wounds, and we hope that those who come later will add their beauty to our ever-changing landscape. I believe we need the power of artists, poets, writers, thinkers, alongside all the other builders of our future, so that as we dream, we turn again to language, to words, to teach us what it means to heal, to dream and to find our way to an America we have not yet met, but hope to embrace on some future horizon. I am a poet storyteller. And as I think about the work we have ahead of us and the legacies we hope to leave for the future, I think of these words and the landscape of an America we desperately hope for and need. I've seen an artist take an old painting and add something to it, stretch the frame and reorient us to a different perspective we did not notice before. I've seen a musician take an old song and redefine it, add melodies and lyrics that create a new home from an old one. I've seen a writer recreate a classic and allow it to breathe with diversity and care, becoming better than it once was. So I want to be an artist too, and take the landscape of the America I've known, painting it, stretching its boundaries to become boundaryless, placing in new characters that have long been forgotten, remembering those who went before who told us exactly who we are, and holding space for the next artist to come along, a child reaching out for the paintbrush in my hand. I will offer it to them freely, and they will continue the work, the artists of our time, the prophets of our future, teaching us again and again the beauty we've come from and the steady possibilities of who we can one day become. Miigwech, thank you.
Wherever we look, we can find arguments for who we are or who we might be. But despite their claims to authority or comprehensiveness, those arguments often feel helplessly incomplete. Have you also had the jarring and alienating experience of peering into what we are told America is and not recognizing what's reflected back? Who are we? The longer the American experiment wears on, the more overwhelming this question becomes, as its premises strain beneath the weight of what they've allowed to follow from them. My community building work, inspired by Bahá'í teachings, has allowed me to imagine new ways of being an American. In whatever community they reside, Baha'is have been charged with building, shoulder to shoulder with their neighbors, patterns of community life based on the creative elaboration of spiritual principles. This finds expression in several discrete activities: children's classes, spiritual empowerment programs for younger youth, study circles, and devotional gatherings, none of which are tethered to any specific religious truth, all of which demand elucidating what a shared moral framework might look like to make tighter community bonds. Several times a week, I welcome small groups of friends, some Baha'i and some not, into my home to have conversations, reflect on service, and plan. We have exploratory conversations about sacred writings, current events, and social change. We often disagree, but slowly, the more we gather, we feel a shared sense of purpose begin to bubble up among us. one that feels distinctly contrapuntal to the forces of division, polarization, and hatred that have come to characterize so much of our public discourse. Week by week, my friends and I come to our conversation bearing the weight of what we are told America might be, accounts that all have all the heft and inspiration of a paperweight. While we do not put these accounts aside during our conversations, indeed they inform our conversations to a great extent, there is a sense of keeping them somewhat at a distance as we dream together of what a better future might look like. Over the course of these gatherings, a most liberating possibility has struck me. It is not for me on my own to define the content of a constructive American narrative, but through a process of opening my home to my neighbors and friends and beginning to articulate a collective vision, I can begin to see the outline of a sentence that we might contribute to that story. It's as though at the horizon of our conversation, the ghost of an answer is starting to take shape to the question of who we might be. Maybe this is at the heart of my community building efforts, not to redeem a dream, but to redream it. But that dream, that answer, is not the property of any one of us. It's something so large and so grand that each of us can only see a small piece of it, as though we were children peering out at a keyhole at our parents. Through serving our communities together, we broaden the keyhole, expanding our visions as we fuse our hearts and fortunes together. I wonder, should enough people take up this kind of work and these kinds of conversations, could a new story of America emerge? What time is it on the clock of the world? In 1974, 7 years after fires lit up Detroit, in their book Revolution and Evolution in the 20th Century, activists Jimmy and Grace Lee Boggs posed this question for the first time. It would obsess them for the rest of their lives, fueling much of their efforts to build a new America. This question is a creative prompt without precise significance, but one way to answer it. Today, we are in a critical moment for the American soul. Time is a moving image of reality, and American history is a wheel, spinning over and over again on an axis that has yet to be defined. Who are we? What time is it on the clock of the world? Tick-tock.
Can I use this one? Oh, okay. So we have just a few minutes for audience engagement with these two essays. And as you guys think about what you might offer, one question that comes to mind is a phrase in Caitlin's essay that you say kind of twice in different ways, but this idea of finding our way to each other. And then in James's essay, you talk a lot about the role of community. And so, you know, there's sort of an intimacy in both of the stories that you tell about that. So I wonder if, as people think of what questions they might want to ask, just what is the sort of meaning behind finding our way to each other through story, or for James, you know, if you want to expand it all on the idea of the role that community might play in creating social transformation.
Please.
I was sharing earlier just when I'm in like an interview or something and people are like, what brings you hope? And usually I answer children. And then the other answer I have is my like interfaith, interspiritual relationships. They just always do, because that is where just this beautifully rich community has shown up in my life. I mean, for a long time. This is way before I became a writer, way before just interacting across differences with other humans is so beautiful. And it especially if it's over food or in a space where we're just showing up in each other's lives because it matters and we need it, like for the most basic reasons. And I think that is just what it means to be human, and it fosters so much care and solidarity and kinship. And so when I was able to then start doing this work as an adult, it just felt to me like coming home to something, and still feels like that all the time. It's such a gift, and I cherish it so much.
Yeah, with respect to community, you know, I'm not a political philosopher at all, but one thing that I've observed is like the political structuring of our country is such that we see the social order almost as a byproduct of the interaction of two protagonists, the institution and the individual, sort of in this antagonistic relationship with one another that produces friction that then leads to social change for the better, for the worse. And in my reading of society that's kind of an incomplete vision in that it's lacking a very important protagonist also, which is the community, which is more than just a loose affiliation of individuals gathered with common interest. In my view, it's actually a distinct protagonist of social order and social change. And this is important because it's a protagonist that I feel it's been progressively deracinated from public life over the course of several decades and perhaps centuries. And you know, I remember when I first moved to Minneapolis, you know, these are very small plots of land that are beside each other. You know, it's like 0.2 acres or something like this, right? But me and none of my neighbors knew each other. We had no relationship with one another and no real structure for channeling our close proximity to one another in any sort of meaningful dialogue or movement for social change. But one of the things that I've observed as I've been with people and been working with them in close collaboration is you start to see that maybe at first the conversations you have with your neighbors starts as you all throwing different insights into a bucket, you know, or something like that. And you don't really know what to do with this bucket. But eventually, as you get more in the habit of collecting and collaborating with your neighbors, you start to see a collective vision emerge that's distinctive from all these different individual, you know, notions put together. And so then you start to see the community actually emerge as a genuine protagonist on its own right. And for me, that's part of the work that we need to do to generate some sort of productive narrative is maybe reestablish that protagonist of the community.
Thank you both. Yeah, I think we have time for maybe one question, and I see Michael has a question.
Thank you. I'm Michael Scholar with the Aspen Institute. Community is being used by many, many people to mean many different things now. There are online communities, there are identity communities. When you speak of community, and James, you were just talking about place-based community, sometimes it feels that the idea of community is being diluted, where, you know, I've got my X identity community, I've got this online support group community, and I'm just curious, how do you define community? And how do we make sure that when we talk about community, we're talking about something that actually does bring us together, because often community can be used to separate.
Yeah, that's a great question. I won't pretend to have a complete answer to it. But I think starting with geographical proximity is actually a really helpful way to conceive of it at first, you know, because I think that having community built solely around shared interest or shared categories of belonging, like you say, it can be a way to sort of to enforce a certain set of differences or division among one another, you know. And the fact is that social reality is messy and we're bumping up on each other in all sorts of different nexus points. And that tends to find like immediate expression in like your immediate geography, you know. So the neighborhood that I live in, for example, there's all sorts of different people gathered together. And so finding those shared interests, that shared sense of vision and purpose, it's quite challenging. And it's not necessarily like, we don't necessarily have a ton in common other than we live on the same block with one another, you know. But gathering together around that interest and then trying to develop a shared set of objectives for what the community could look like, trying to cast it in a different light, like to me that's where a lot of that work begins, you know. And that's how I begin to approach it. That may not be a satisfying answer, but that's the one I have right now. You have one, Caitlin?
I was just thinking about a community for me that's actually an online one that was formed out of need and want for care and solidarity and kinship. And it's groups for me to be in presence with other authors, especially women, especially Black, Indigenous, women of color, to be together and support each other through the publishing industry, because it's really difficult. And there are a lot of ways we doubt ourselves and we lose sight of our gifts and what we do in this world. And that has been one of the most life-giving communities for me. And so it's actually, it really comes out of just, I really like your socks, by the way. It really comes out of just this sense of need and care. And again, it comes back to these kind of achings of our souls to remember that we are human and that we long for kinship. And we need it in person and we need it in spaces in our physical communities, but it can be created in really, really beautiful, intentional ways in this online world we're also living in, which is a gift in a lot of ways as well.
Thank you both for contributing. I feel like, Michael, you set me up for this. I just want to say one great way to explore the meaning of community, one great tool is this film Join or Die. It's a documentary that is basically like a reflection and meditation on this narrative or the story of community in America. So if you guys want to, if you want to answer Michael's question, there's another place. But you guys did fantastic jobs answering, and thank you for your contribution to the book and for interacting with the audience. I'm going to invite Audrey back up to welcome our keynote speaker.
So oftentimes when we do this work and we discern and we think about it, then we're still, in some ways, even as diverse as we are, we still can be in our own bubble. And so one of the ways to then have an external kind of look and a talk back into the product that we are putting out into the world, the Religion and Society program has invited the Reverend Dr. Frederick Haynes III, who is the senior pastor of Friendship West Baptist Church, to really talk about why do these narratives matter in this moment. He received an advance copy of the narratives that have been written, and he has something to say about that. And so if you all know the Reverend Dr. Frederick Haynes, you know that he has a word to say. He is a prophetic pastor, passionate leader, social activist, eloquent orator, and educator. As the senior pastor of Friendship West Baptist Church in Dallas, Texas, for 40 years, he has grown the congregation from over 100 to 13,000 members. Dr. Haynes holds degrees from Bishop College, Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, and the Graduate Theological Foundation. A dedicated community leader, he founded the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Conference and has received numerous awards for his ministry and activism, including the Joseph R. Biden Jr. Presidential Lifetime Achievement Leadership Award in Community Service in 2022. I also want to mention, for those who might be familiar with the Hamptons Minister Conference, he was the recent keynote preacher there as well. So I think that he is gone to prepare for a word, but are we ready for the Reverend Dr. Frederick Haynes III to come forward? Not yet? All righty. So, as he's still praying about the word that he would bring before us, this actually provides a great time, again, because time is precious. I would like to mention and tell you a little bit more about the executive director who's coming forward. Our Josh Good is the executive director now of the Religion Society program. RSP, the Religion Society program, I want to remind you, our whole purpose is to ignite change through convening, through researching, through looking at the challenges and the opportunities at the intersection of religion, culture, and justice. Josh will bring with him Faith Angle Forum, and now that's part of the Religion Society program, it helps to strengthen reporting and commentary on how religious believers, religious convictions, and moral arguments affect politics and public life. I think many in this room can say that we should give a voice to how the media should cover religion. Josh has been doing that faithful work and will continue to do that work foundationally and in a broader way here at the Religion Society program. So just a couple minutes for Josh to greet you, and then we have our speaker and our preacher in the room. Josh Good.
Well, this will be quick. Thank you for the privilege of having me. I'm about 5 hours and 6 minutes in, so doesn't get any greener than that. But in reading the wonderful program that is before all of us, and in hearing the stories we've just heard, and in anticipating what we're going to hear in about 90 seconds, you know, it occurred to me this old story about a preacher in Louisiana who noticed that in his congregation there was a parishioner who wasn't typically there. And as the sermon wrapped and the final hymn was sung and people were leaving, about ready to leave the sanctuary, this man stood up in the back corner of the room and he said, "Use me, Lord, use me," and sat back down. And the preacher was a little jostled by this, but, more or less they were able to sort of finish out the service. And as the congregation was leaving the church that day, he said to this gentleman, the pastor said to this gentleman, we actually have wanted to refinish the pews. We were going to sand them down and do a little work on them. And we also wanted to put up a new wallpaper in the back of the sanctuary. If you had any time, it'd be wonderful if you could stop by maybe sometime this week. And a week went by, and the following Sunday, the pastor was back up in the pulpit, preaching away. And this same gentleman in the corner of the room stood up and he said, "Use me, Lord, use me, but only in an advisory capacity," and sat back down. And the thing that occurs to me is that this is a room of doers, not talkers. It's an honor to have you with us. It's a privilege to be part of a program that's being led by the Reverend Dr. Audrey Price. And back to you, Dr. Price, and we'll have our guest.
I bring forward the Reverend Dr. Frederick Haynes III, who's going to give us, in my spiritual context, we will say he's going to give us the meat. I would say in the substance, and then after he gives a prophetic word, then you are invited to go out and enjoy dessert, and then come back in and we will engage in a panel discussion.
First, let me express my appreciation to Reverend Dr. Audrey Price for her outstanding and visionary leadership. I also am excited about the future of this great organization under the leadership of Josh, and we will ask for God to use us in partnership with you. So thank you so much for your spirit, and we're excited about what's next. Let me just very quickly say that I am trying to find appropriate language for how inspired I am by what I have witnessed already. I am so excited because, unfortunately, as you well know, religion has been given such a bad name by many who practice religion in order to harm people. And so because of the weaponizing of religion, especially in the context of the American empire, we have witnessed the nightmarish consequences, and so many in Gen Z as well as the millennial generation have basically said they're done with religion, though they maintain a commitment to spirituality, which for me is an exciting possibility if what we are doing here is not limited to what we do here. And so I'm excited about what I've been so inspired by today, and I cannot thank you enough for the publication that has come out. I had a preview of the coming attraction, and then to hear our poets and guests has blessed me tremendously. My topic that I've been assigned, and I've got to give a shout out to my beloved brother Adam, who is with us. He gives leadership to Sojourners. Thank you so much, Adam, for your presence and for your great leadership. My topic has to do with why our religious stories matter. Why do our religious stories matter? Sadly, sinfully, religion has often been used in order to abuse, oppress, and engage in othering. Religion, sinfully, has been used to oppress as well as to engage in othering. Frederick Douglass, for whom I'm named, that silver-tongued orator and prophet for freedom, testified, sadly, that until I learned to read for myself, I thought God intended for me to be a slave. How sad is that? Frederick Douglass, in essence, is testifying that even God was against him because of the religious orientation he was receiving at the hands of those who, in the name of Jesus, would engage in oppression, othering, and abuse. Frederick Douglass, imagine as a kid receiving religious training, as it were, and in the training that you are receiving, you were led to believe that God, the Creator, the Supreme Being, intended for you to be a second-class citizen, intended for you to be on the receiving end of abuse in the name of Jesus. Sadly, I think all of us will agree that we live in a world where religion has given God a bad name. God has been given a bad name because we've seen religion baptize bigotry. We've witnessed religion Christianize colonialism, not to mention anoint white supremacy, racism, as well as give sanction to Jim and Jane Crow segregation while saying that toxic masculinity and sexism, not to mention homophobia and xenophobia, are okay in the name of God. Religion has given God a bad name. And the sad reality is it's taken place through the takeover of narratives, the hostile takeover, the unholy takeover of narratives that have united in unholy wedlock white supremacy and so many religions, especially Christianity. And I'm speaking to you, of course, as a Christian minister. And so because of my intimate involvement and engagement with Christianity, I hope you will allow me in the moments I am blessed to share with you my own insider's insight into the damage that Christianity has often done in the name of Jesus while creating white Jesus in its own image and likeness that has been hell for people of color around the world. Yes, my sisters and brothers, white Jesus has been hell for black people. White Jesus has been hell for natives. Jesus has been hell for brown people. White Jesus has been hell for women. And for those who are created in a way that defies what white male supremacy defines as the norm, in a nation that was born in the sin of a genocidal takeover and then shaped by anti-black and anti-other white male supremacy. Of course, it could not have been done without an empire utilizing religion in a weaponizing fashion to ensure that a narrative would get out to justify oppression. I believe I'll quote James Baldwin now. James Baldwin testified in a mind-blowing way that while growing up, he says it is traumatic and shocking in a world that makes a hero out of Gary Cooper to discover that while you celebrate Cooper, you are the Indian. Permit me to back up and unpack that. James Baldwin is watching the old cowboys and Indians flicks. And while watching the cowboys and Indian flick, James Baldwin is, of course, because of the skill of the storyteller, siding with Gary Cooper, siding with the heroic cowboy. After all, the storyteller has ensured that the quote-unquote Indians are the villains, are the savage bad people. And as a consequence, here is James Baldwin rooting as a 5 or 6 year old child for Gary Cooper, only to discover he's rooting against himself because he is an Indian, quote unquote, as it were. Empires have a way of weaponizing narratives married in unholy wedlock to religions in order to justify and maintain oppression. And my sisters and brothers, we gather here at the Aspen Institute to wrestle with this, to wrestle with the bad name religion has given to God and what white Jesus has done, creating so much hell for people of color and women and those who were othered in this world. And yet I believe what we are doing here is taking a page from Howard Thurman. Howard Thurman goes to India. And when he goes to India, he meets real Indians. And the Indians are blown away. How is it that you, a black man, can be a Christian when Christianity has done so much damage to black people? How do you do that? From that conversation, Howard Thurman writes the classic that we all are familiar with, Jesus and the Disinherited, in which Howard Thurman says that Jesus was a disinherited Palestinian Jew who grew up on the backside of the colonizing Roman Empire that occupied and oppressed much of the known world. Jesus grows up as a second-class citizen. Imagine that. Those who practice the Christian faith are following one, a Savior who was not born in Rome in a castle, but homeless in Bethlehem, and then had to escape under a genocidal policy of Herod to Egypt. And there in Egypt, he hides out and then grows up in Nazareth. And Nazareth was so hood that someone said, can any good thing come out of Nazareth? Nazareth was so hood that if NWA was rapping in the days of Jesus, they'd have dropped an album called Straight Outta Nazareth, because Nazareth was hood. And then Jesus spends his ministry not ministering in the mainstream, but instead in Galilee, in the backyard of Palestine, in the backyard of Israel. And as he ministers to those on the margins. Imagine that. Jesus, who is supposed to be the Son of God, you're not hanging out in Rome or Cairo or even Jerusalem, but instead you are giving free health care to those with pre-existing conditions. Instead, you were taking a 2-piece and 5 biscuits and multiplying it, and as a consequence, you feed those who are a multitude of those who are food insecure. You are transforming funerals of devastating grief into festive family reunions. Look at Jesus leading a march on Jerusalem. We call it the Palm Sunday processional, but that's been watered down. It was a choreographed demonstration of resistance. And after that, Jesus goes into the temple and he sees those engaged in economic exploitation of those who are standing at a moment in time with their backs against the wall, to use the language of Thurman. And Jesus pulls the Parliament Funkadelic and says, I'm going to turn this mother out. Jesus, my sisters and brothers, basically is that dude who shows up on the backside of life, sides with those who are oppressed and othered, and Jesus is seen by Christians as the Son of God. What does that mean? It means that God evidently has a heart for those who are hurting. God has a heart for those who are othered and oppressed. And if you are doing the work of God, Josh, I love the illustration. God used me. If you want God to use you, you have to be used where God is doing God's work. And God is always, every single religion I've studied, is always showing up on the side of those who are oppressed and others, lifting up those who are downtrodden. And this Jesus and the Disinherited book by Howard Thurman basically takes the name and identity of Jesus, who was suffering and is suffering from what? Identity theft. Jesus is suffering from identity theft. I think that's the word I can leave us with right now. Jesus is suffering from identity theft, but Howard Thurman reclaims his identity and offers, I love this, a remix of the narrative. I think that's what we've come to do. And that is to say, there is a narrative that upholds empire, oppression, and oftentimes gets in bed with religion in order to justify it. But then you can remix the story. Remix. You get remixed, don't you? That's what hip hop has done with so many songs, where they basically have remixed. It means to go back and grab what was original and then give a new flavor and melody to it, as well as lyrics. And before you know it, you recognize some of it, but there's been so much new that has been given to it that it gives birth to something that is wondrously powerful. And so given that, Howard Thurman uses Jesus and the Disinherited to remix the story so that his Indian hosts now get an understanding as to how it is black people of all people could stand with Jesus. It could be well said that black folk love Jesus but couldn't stand Christians. And so as a consequence, black people got with Jesus, and in getting with Jesus, they got with the remix story of Jesus. Why is it important? Why do our religious stories matter? Because I'm convinced that at the Aspen Institute, we are remixing the stories of religion. And as we remix those stories, maybe we can do what Howard Thurman's Jesus and the Disinherited did. You're looking at me strange, like you're not sure. I'll help you out right quick. It is said that Martin Luther King Jr. had 2 books in his briefcase every place he went. What were those 2 books? The Bible and Jesus and the Disinherited. It is said that he read Jesus and the Disinherited before the Montgomery bus boycott, and under the inspiration of Gandhi and his tactics in nonviolent resistance and reading Jesus and the Disinherited, it gave birth to what became the Second Reconstruction, in what Maya Angelou calls these yet to be United States of America. It all began with a remixing of a narrative that had become a nightmare for those who were othered and oppressed. But because Martin King, or because Howard Thurman understood the power of telling our stories, the power of remixing narratives so that we get the liberating truth out of that narrative, it gave birth to the Second Reconstruction. And I'm submitting that it's time for, to quote my good brother William Barber, a third Reconstruction. And maybe the birth of that third Reconstruction can happen right here at the Aspen Institute, because we are remixing the story of religion and connecting with the God of our weary years and silent tears. What does that look like? I'm almost done. Number one, it looks like this, and I love it so much, and that is when you see Howard Thurman remixing the story, you see Howard Thurman understanding that to remix that story as we tell our stories is to inject dignity into the veins of those who have been held back with their backs against the wall. No wonder, again, when you read Jesus and the Disinherited, it is powerful, because Jesus and the Disinherited, Thurman says, hatred, deception, and fear are always dogs, hound dogs of hell that dog the footsteps of the poor and the disinherited who have their backs against the wall. But those are not tools for redemption. sin. Those are not tools for healing and liberation. So the last chapter, he talks about the power of love, because love really, according to Michael Eric Dyson, justice is what love sounds like when it speaks in public. And so if that's the case, then what Thurman is driving at is that when we remix the narrative and now tell the story, it injects dignity into the veins of those who have been held back. I think I'll quote Dr. King, since you're still not feeling me. Dr. King puts it like this. Dr. King said about the beginning of the movement, Negroes in Albany, Jordan, straighten their backs up. And whenever you straighten your back up, you're going somewhere, because no one can ride your back unless you're bending over. I like that, because in a real sense, when you have a religious story that injects dignity into the veins of your spirit, your heart, as well as your mind, all of a sudden you straighten your back up. That's where movements begin, when we straighten our backs up. No wonder, I believe it's Paulo Freire who writes in Pedagogy of the Oppressed, the necessity of consciousness, the necessity of being aware of the systems that you find yourself up against, not to see them as impenetrable, but instead to see them as systems that can be transformed. I'm letting you know that it begins with an injection of dignity that lets us know that we can rise above the current realities that are so overwhelming and transform them in the process. But then there's something else. It's not just injecting dignity, it's inspiring a moral imagination of what the country should and could look like. Jeremiah Wright Jr. does it brilliantly. He says this country has to come to grips with the fact that different does not mean deficient. How can we be the United States of America if somehow we other people that don't look like us, think like us, love like us? Instead, Dr. Wright said we have to understand that different ain't deficient, it's just different. Can I add to that? I got to remix it. Different ain't deficient, but it adds to our dynamic. That's what the country can understand, and that is just because I'm not like you, it does not make me less than you. Just because you're not like me, it does not make you less than me, but instead we're able to participate in the beauty of diversity and imagine what the world can look like if all of us are respected for our humanity, if all of us are seen as children of a creator who is much bigger than any name we can give that creator. If all of us see the humanity in the other, we'll see that they are different, but it does not make them deficient, but it helps to make all of us dynamic. Preach, Freddie Haynes, I'm trying not to, but that's really good right there. And so, my sisters and brothers, please understand, we have to have that moral imagination. I quote Dr. Wright one more time. He talks about the fact that if you bake a cake, pull it out of the oven, and then remember, oh my God, I forgot to put sugar in the cake. What do? Do you pour sugar on top of the cake and say that is going to make the cake right? He says, no, you have to have the imagination to rebake the cake. We're coming up on 250 years, and we have to understand that the cake of this country was not constituted right from the beginning. And because it was not constituted right, are we going to just try to pour sugar on top of the ill-constituted cake, or are we going to have the moral imagination to rebake the cake where it's one really of liberty and justice for all? I think my time is running out, so I'll go ahead and give you one more piece. Not only are we injecting dignity into the veins of those who find themselves with their backs against the wall, not only must we be inspired with moral imagination, but may this instigate a movement and methodology that will make the country what it wants to become, what it should become, what it can become, an instigation. I like that because don't forget, King receives Jesus and the disinherited. And the very first speech that he gives as president of the Montgomery Improvement Association, he ensures that they are going to fight the fight with the weapons of love, the weapons of nonviolence, because you can't get to the right place you're going the wrong way. There is no wrong way to the right place. The means and the methodology have to also be appropriate if we're going to build a just and true America, a just and true world. That's what King does, inspired by the remixing of a story from Howard Thurman, reading afresh Jesus not as one who sides with empires and puts his name on slave ships, but a Jesus who shows up on the side of those who are oppressed and suffering. That remixing, that telling our story is powerful, and it can indeed make a difference. It can make such a difference because it gives us the methodology, the motivation, and the means to make a difference. I close with this. I think it's Laurie Daniel Favor. She tells the story of the fact that, and she's a brilliant attorney, she has a show every morning on Sirius XM, and check it out. On her show, she shares something that really grabbed me. It's a powerful story, so powerful I had to download it on my mental computer. Now I'm going to oratorically pass you a copy. Here is what she shared. It's rooted, don't miss this, in the statement by the late great Justice Thurgood Marshall. Thurgood Marshall, who was a protege of Charles Hamilton Houston at Howard Law School, that set the stage for the 60 years ago, the 54 Brown versus Board of Education. And Charles Hamilton Houston told Thurgood Marshall and his students that you are to be not just attorneys for profit, but you are to be attorneys who are social engineers. I love that. And from that, Thurgood Marshall shares with his proteges, here's what you do. Do the right thing and let the law catch up. I like that because everything legal ain't just. Everything legal ain't right. You didn't get it. Slavery was legal, but it wasn't right. Jim and Jane Crow segregation, legal, but not right. Women not having the right to vote, legal, but not right. Blockbusting, legal, but not right. And so with that being the case, understand that Thurgood Marshall says, do what's right, let the law catch up, and here's the accompanying story, and I'm done. Laurie Daniel Favor says a teacher one day stands before her classroom. It's a third grade classroom, and she has on the desk a bowl with water and a goldfish in it. The teacher says, I'm about to leave the classroom, but before I do, I'm going to take this goldfish out of the bowl and put it on this desk. Now understand, the goldfish bowl is a structure where the goldfish can thrive and flourish. It's taken by the teacher out of its flourishing environment and now placed on a desk where it is gasping for air, flipping and flopping and trying not to die. Can you see on the screen of your imagination this helpless goldfish before a stunned third grade classroom? It's gasping for air, it's flipping and flopping. The teacher now says, I'm about to exit the classroom. If any of you try to save this goldfish and put it back in the water, you will be expelled from this school. And she exits the classroom, slams the door shut behind her. The third grade students are shocked as they are watching, handcuffed by helplessness, this goldfish that is now on a structure not designed for it to flourish and thrive. And finally, Finally, a little girl gets up, runs to the front of the classroom, grabs the fish. It hops out of her hand. She says to her stunned classmates, are you just going to sit there and let the fish die? And they all get up, organized to corral the fish. They put it in the bowl, and the fish is now flourishing in a structure instead of dying on an ill-fated structure. They rush back to their seats. The door opens. In walks the teacher. The teacher says, I am so proud of each and every one of you. You've learned the lesson for the day. And the lesson for the day is always do the right thing, even if the consequences may get you in trouble. I'm done. That's my word for all of us. If those kids in 3rd grade can come together and save a goldfish, can we come together in spite of our religious differences, in spite of the different way we call God? Can we come together and save humanity? Can we come together and save this planet that is on fire? Can we come together and save those who are suffering in the Congo, save those who are suffering in Palestine, save those who are suffering, yes, in Haiti, not to mention the Sudan, not to mention the streets of many of our cities in this country? If your religion won't save a goldfish, I want to know what good your religion is. Let's come together, because if those kids can save a goldfish, then we, in the name of our God, however we call that God, can save this world and create a better world, because that is why our religious stories matter.
All right. Preaching like that would get me in trouble, but the Aspen Institute will never be the same. It's a danger also to put a preacher up after a preacher with a sermon like that. But I thank all of you in terms of doing this, this publication, because it is our way of rebaking the cake. And so you have inspired us, you have given us a word, you have reminded us that the work we do matters. This is why I enjoy being here, because we hold first and foremost the human dignity of all who exist on this planet. And we will continue to fight in ways that we can to make sure that the human dignity of all are affirmed. So thank you for a word that just undergirded the work that we're doing. You have 10 minutes. 10 minutes, we do mean it, because we have a wonderful panel who wants to just dive right in, because the Reverend Dr. Frederick Haynes has set us up. So engage in some beautiful dessert. The restrooms are available, and then let's please be back here at 2:50. All right, welcome back, everyone. Welcome back, welcome back. As we transition now from why the narratives matter, we're going to start a conversation around forward-looking tellings. We will invite our panelists to share just a portion of their wonderful essays, and then we will engage some questions of the panel, and you will be able to submit questions as well. I believe that you can, is it through the QR code where they can submit their questions? So there'll be a slide up in the moment where you can log in and submit your questions. So first, Russell, will you share a little of your essay?
Okay, thanks, Audrey, and thank you, Aspen Institute and the U.S. Bahá'í Office of Public Affairs for inviting us. Growing up, I never thought I always wanted to be a writer, but this is my opportunity to re-narrate America and to do my remix, so thank you. Xenophobia, the fear of strangers, is one source of the racism against Asian Americans and of the racial binaries that underwrite our othering. As I've wrestled with my family's century of exclusion and with the racial trauma and moral injury of COVID-19 discrimination, I've recognized that America's fear of Asians as aliens threats has long been embedded in its racial subconsciousness. To uproot it, we need to develop xenophilia, which is directly translated as the love of the stranger and is the opposite of xenophobia. In the Bible, this word is often cited as hospitality. And one way to rewrite this particular American narrative of racism is to reclaim this ancient virtue, to remix it, if you will. The hospitality I experience from Taiwanese persons, containing aspects of Confucian empathy, reciprocity, and family responsibilities, offers one hopeful model. While Asian and immigrants have received a hostile welcome in the U.S., I felt warmly received when I spent a semester in Taiwan. During our stay, my wife lost her tooth filling, and we contacted a dentist's office run by the cousin of my friend's mom. Even though we had never met, Aunt Mei Li warmly greeted us at the subway exit and walked us to the office. And along the way, she asked us about how we enjoyed Taiwan, and we shared the sites we'd like to visit and some of the difficulties we encountered, such as not knowing it would be so cold. So while my wife had her procedure, Aunt Mei Li gleefully took us shopping and insisted on purchasing a winter jacket for our 4-year-old. When the dentist finished filling the tooth, they were adamant that we shouldn't pay. And upon hearing that we wanted to tour Taroko Gorge, she replied, "Oh, we have a guest house there. I'll give you the keys, and you can spend a weekend. And you could use our scooters, too." Months later, when I asked her why her aunt was so generous and hospitable, my friend replied that Aunt Mei Li saw us as family. As a friend of her favorite cousin's daughter, quite a few degrees of separation from my American point of view, I became part of her inner circle of belonging, and she was responsible to meet all my needs and more. As strangers to a new land, my family and I were overwhelmed to be blessed beneficiaries of this family's Confucian intergenerational love, their ties of interdependence and reciprocity, and their generous hospitality.
Thank you, Russell. Sure. And I invite you to read the entire essay, as Russell really shares a huge part of himself in that. Yolanda.
Excellent. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for hosting this. I'm going to read a little bit about imagination. I talked about memory and imagination. I'm going to focus on the imagination part. Imagination is more important than knowledge, for knowledge is limited, whereas imagination embraces the entire world, stimulating progress, giving birth to evolution. Albert Einstein said that. My vision for the future is one of wholeness and spirituality. To make memory and imagination real, I believe we must make our way back to seeing each human B'Tselem Elohim, in the image of the divine. We do this by meeting people where they are along their journeys, understanding that as human beings, we all experience joy and pain, and no one person's suffering is greater or less than the other. We do this by respecting and embracing difference, celebrating the fact that diversity of thought and experiences make up the beautiful tapestry of humanity. And we see each other, B'Tselem Elohim, by acknowledging that everyone has a story and that those stories are powerful and they shape who we are and how we navigate our individual and collective existence. We must seize the opportunity to dismantle the structures that have created hierarchies, strife, and conflict, and instead create a movement of restorative justice through the foundation of religion and spirituality, which will lead to peace, love, and harmony in our country and our world. There are some specific character traits, or midot, that are used in Judaism through Musar that I want to name, so I'm skipping around a little bit. This idea of holy boldness will give us the courage to be bold like a lion when it comes to the sacred and the divine. We will stand up for what is right for the sake of human dignity, no matter if it makes us uncomfortable or unpopular. It is what is needed to change the trajectory of human suffering to joy. Dignity for us and others is imperative. We must have dignity for ourselves to see it in others. Compassion allows me to feel and not just wonder. When I can empathize with someone else, it allows me to have a deeper understanding of what they are going through. Love is the human project. It is the fuel needed to move humanity toward justice and liberation for all people. It is how we will heal our world. Truth is the beginning and the end of the conversation. When we realize the connection to trust and truth and trust, we will begin to seek it for deeper knowledge of human experience. It is how we will come to terms with the things we need to repair. Joy can only be created within. We must work hard to create the conditions of loving kindness for one another and for ourselves. It is how we will survive in a country and a world that is currently on fire. Justice is overdue. We must seek it, even for people who are no longer on this earth. Justice must be served to set the balance in the universe in order. A sense of justice will help us pave a path to dismantle systems of injustice in America and our world. Return again and again. We have opportunities to make it right, to fail and return to try again another day. To be human is to be flawed. Return again and again. And shared humanity reminds us that we are all beautiful and flawed. We must find ways to celebrate our beauty and love regardless of our flaws. It is how we will learn to forgive and move forward together, knowing that our safety is found in our solidarity. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Nina, tell us a little about naming.
Okay. The stories of our names are a part of a rich tapestry of American narratives. They're about the reality of our history and how we make meaning of who we are in the broader project of creating a pluralistic society. If we can learn one another's name, what it means to them, how to pronounce it, and how it relates to our own stories, perhaps we can also learn to truly care for one another across barriers that have traditionally separated us. When my husband Noel and I decided to grow our family, we put a lot of intention into naming our children. We hope their names will serve as a foundation for their understanding of who they are as they grow and become who they want to be. Becoming a mother and a parent has been awe-inspiring, hope-filling, and challenging. And because of my children, Ayan and Ashani, I want to be a better person. Their growth is an opportunity for mine. I'm motivated to do my small part to make this country and this world better for and with them. I have always been drawn to the study of religion and culture because as its essence, this work is about meaning making, who we are in relation to others and even to that which is sacred. How might we continually make meaning of our own stories, including the stories of our names, in relation to other stories? How can we redefine the stories and meanings of our shared names, our shared country, that is more inclusive of its rich diversity? Should we change our name altogether? Or perhaps there's a way to reclaim our name by unearthing and uplifting the multitude of stories of the many people who call this place home, perhaps even through simple tools like sharing the stories of our names. We are continually tasked with making meaning of the United States of America, this unfinished project filled with stories that have yet to be heard and yet to be written. Knowing that our children are some small part of this meaning making fills me with hope.
And Akimini, you, like Yolanda, had some things to say about repertory and justice. So.
Yes. Good afternoon, everyone. The title of my essay is Reparations Now for the Healing of This Nation. So let's start. When we talk about reparations, what we are doing is repairing the world. We are not just repairing ourselves, we are repairing those who have oppressed us. Because if we don't repair those who have oppressed us at the same time that we repair ourselves, we won't have a planet. This is Dr. Julius Garvey, son of Pan-Africanist Marcus Garvey. I was stunned into silence when I heard Dr. Julius Garvey make this prophetic declaration last year at the State of the Black World Conference 5 in Baltimore. This conference exists to discuss the political, economic, health, and mental state of Black people around the globe. It is a rare privilege to be in community with fellow Pan-Africanists who not only dream of an America where reparations are the antidote for centuries of anti-Black oppression, but also the cure for the soul sickness of this nation. When one broaches the subject of the soul, they enter the spiritual domain. Often, people cannot perceive the spiritual implications that correlate with the call for reparations. As a reparations activist, I enter into this advocacy work as a public theologian because at its core, I carry the view that the fight for reparations is fundamentally countering a spiritual violation in addition to the economic, sociological, psychological, and physiological harms of white supremacy. I experienced profound resonance with Dr. Garvey's words, for it is rare to hear my beloved comrades frame the fight for reparations on spiritual terms. For as long as I can remember, I have always carried within my constitution, my mind and soul, these intrusive questions: who are my people? Where are my people? And to whom do I belong? These queries have been dancing an existential tango within my soul for most of my life. I have discovered that this line of questioning parallels the experience of adoptees who intuit that something in their life is off, or that there is a piece missing from their life before receiving confirmation of their adoption. This sense that there is a missing piece has been a constant undercurrent in my life. Unlike a foghorn warning of danger ahead, this persistent trio of questions is more akin to a dull roar, not too loud to cause a distraction, but loud enough to beckon me into further exploration. I suspect that I'm not alone in this, for West Africans and African diasporans hear the dull roar at varying decibels within their consciousness too. When my mind did not have the language for the never-ending questions, my body knew full well and continued to pose the questions: who are my people? Where are my people? And to whom do I belong? What does the persistence of these unanswered existential questions do to the psyche and physical well-being of Africans and African diasporans? What are the wages of this manufactured mystery the global project of white supremacy has left us to contend with? Within neuropsychology, epigenetics is the study of how our environment and behaviors can impact how our genes function. These genetic changes are reversible, but one implication is that trauma can be passed down to the next generation, even when they do not experience it firsthand. The body knows. In my early adolescence, my mind received language for what my body knew innately. I am the American-born daughter of Nigerian immigrants who immigrated to the United States in the early 1970s. More specifically, I'm the descendant of the Ibibio people, an ancient ethnic group in the Delta region of southeastern Nigeria, where over 1 million Ibibio people, among other ethnic groups, were stolen and trafficked in the transatlantic slave trade. Not only were my people enslaved, they were also colonized. Reparatory justice is personal. I am a Black woman, an African-American woman, an African woman, a Nigerian woman, and an Ibibio woman. Therefore, when I speak about reparations for slavery, colonialism, neocolonialism, systemic racism, intergenerational trauma, and its progeny, I am not an outside observer. I'm a survivor. Some 10% of the 12.5 million Africans stolen during the transatlantic slave trade were taken from the Cross and Niger rivers in the 18th century. My people, the Ibibio people, are a significant portion of that number. Africans rarely speak of this dark history due to the attendant pain and shame. This traumatic history causes West Africans to suppress what they would prefer to forget, but what is not revealed cannot be healed. The legacy of slavery lives on and echoes in our lives, Africans and African diasporans alike. As a young girl, I remember fragmented oral histories my parents shared with me about relatives stolen in the transatlantic slave trade. In the Ibibio language, my parents used to say, "Mbuburo ke America, edo edito ayin," meaning, Black people in America are our cousins. Till this day, I thank God that my parents had a level of racial consciousness that overrode their colonial education, which had concealed and erased the history of the transatlantic slave trade. If you are privy to the insidious and deceptive nature of colonial education, then you understand what a miracle it was for my African parents to not only lay hold of this critical oral history, but also pass it on to me. To understand why my passion burns for this issue, you need a glimpse into how I was raised. My parents were keenly aware that they were raising American children, and although I am bicultural, they did succeed in raising American kids. Our little apartment in California was a microcosm of two worlds, Nigeria and Black America. My mom would cook a tama soup for herself and my dad, then make spaghetti for my siblings and me. She'd make a goosey soup for her and dad, and then bake barbecue chicken for us kids. My dad was an avid reader, so our home library ranged from the Holy Bible to Alex Haley's autobiography of Malcolm X to Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye. As much as my father loved books, he loved music even more. His JBL record player belted out Stevie Wonder, Isaac Hayes, Fela Kuti, Bob Marley and the Wailers, Jimmy Cliff, Evelyn Champagne King, Marvin Gaye, Victor Wifo, and Rick James, to name a few. Every Saturday, my mom would thread my hair at noon when Soul Train came on, finishing up by the time Solid Gold Dancers with Dionne Warwick came on. If you know, you know. Knowing that I picked up my dad's love for music, she must have known that the Soul Train line would blunt some of the riffing, whining, and wincing from the pain of the metal comb vibrating off my kinky 4C hair. Saturdays were not to be trifled with in that Uwan household. When nightfall came, my dad's epic house parties would commence, and our 2-bedroom and 1-bathroom apartment would magically morph into a Soul Train dance floor nearly every week. Our little apartment became a dance hall of the African diaspora as my parents' African American, and Caribbean friends would eat, drink, and dance until they dropped, literally. This is how I was raised. This is how I was shaped. My parents taught me that there was never any differentiation between us as Nigerians and African Americans or Caribbeans. We lived in the same neighborhood, slept at each other's houses. They were our play aunties, uncles, and cousins. Although we were not connected by blood, we were connected by love. They married into our family, and we have married into theirs. We were not taught to think of ourselves differently, not only because of our family history, but because they knew that race and racism are the American way of life. We were raised to believe that African Americans and Caribbeans are our cousins because they are.
Thank you. So again, and the slide will come up. If you have questions, you're welcome to use the QR code or to log on to slido.com and put the code in and submit your question. So as you're preparing your questions, I'll start with a few. So Ekemini and Russell, I want to, can you speak more in terms of in answering the questions? So we had some very kind of open-ended questions, and contributors were able to submit essays on topics of their own choosing. And actually, until I think probably Thursday or Friday last week was the first time that the contributors actually saw the entirety of the work. So we wanted them to be able to work independently, trusting that the divine would weave that common thread. So within your essays, you both really attend to the fact of being, or the notion of first, second generation, being in America, but also part of the fabric and the narrative, but how that's been left out. Why was that important to address in this publication?
For me, it was important to address Asian traditions and heritages because it's been erased, that it's not acknowledged, that it's actually seen as foreign and other. And that leads to actual real consequences on the streets, on the grounds. You saw the spate of anti-Asian violence, yes. That if we're seen as others, then we're treated as outsiders and spat upon, attacked, our grandmas yelled at. So for me, introducing America to our narratives, introducing America to our traditions, introducing America to what America could be, is really important because America does need to be remixed and to reclaim ancient virtues, to see what it could be with the gifts of those from the outside. So for me, I see America as pretty broken and needs to look outside of itself in order to repair itself.
That's good. Yeah, I think for my part, I'm thinking about. At the moment, I believe I want to say it's either Brookings Institute or Pew Research, but I think it's Pew Research, that says that 1 in 5 Black people in this country are actually immigrants. And that's a significant, change that's occurred over the last couple of decades. And so for me, it was important. I mean, it's my social location, being second gen, but I think it is important to be able to give voice, to what it means to have to be the descendant of Nigerian immigrants who came in the first wave, and the ways in which we've been socialized, and even our own political posturing within America is even different from second, and third wave immigrants, Black immigrants, whether they're from the Caribbean or Africa. To me, it was really important to put another face on immigration, in addition to what Russell contributed as well.
Okay. So Yolanda, I was really touched by the fact that, and I'll share this, I didn't ask your permission, but I'll share this. You said, I have an invite to be at the White House today, but you view this as a priority. So why, in participating in this and writing about restorative justice, is such a priority for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's important to actually practice what you're trying to achieve. And for me, because of the work that I do and because of the identities, the intersecting identities I have as a Black Jewish woman from the South, and I can add on all these other kind of pieces to it, it's just important. It was important for me to be here today, to be a part of this sacred space and community, to really hear from others and to talk about how our narratives are so important to how we tell the story and how we make sure our young people are understanding and hearing what's happening as well. They're our future, and I think that it's important for us to acknowledge that and to use this opportunity to really be in a space and conversation where we can explore together. And so this has been on my calendar, and it honestly was a priority for me, because I think that restorative justice is a way for us to forgive and to understand. And I talked about the importance of the human project, that we are flawed and that we should take that as a part of our collective journey and use that as a way to catapult forward. And so it was important for me to be here to be able to share that with everyone.
Thank you. I'm glad to have you. So I'm going to try to weave some things together, Nina, that you might not necessarily had woven together, but left an impression upon me in reading your essay. So I want you to share a little about your work Shoulder to Shoulder, because I think it's important in the time that we're in, and the whole notion of how even in those moments why naming is so important, and how that ties into the narratives of a healthy America, but also a healthy America makes a healthier global world. So I realized I did something I shouldn't have done as a panelist. I think I gave you 3 questions. But just dive right in.
All right. I think, there's multiple ways to address the questions. I think, with Shoulder to Shoulder, the Shoulder to Shoulder campaign, our original name when we were founded in 2010 was Shoulder to Shoulder campaign, Standing with American Muslims, Upholding American Values. And when we had come together and talked about our greater visions for society, we decided to change our tagline to Standing with American Muslims, Advancing American Ideals, to articulate this sort of aspirational vision that we have not ever reached. When we think about upholding values, what are we upholding when there's so much injustice in front of us, and from our very founding? And when we think about this idea that we are ever reaching, and this concept, the stories of our names, just to be silly a little, to say that using Dr. Haynes' metaphor, it could sound like a bunch of sugar, but there's also so much depth. When we think about the fact that we were named, we don't have a choice in that. Our parents named us, and we could change it, or we also have this choice to discover who we are and who we're becoming. And, who is Nina? And that question changes, through my life. And so I think that, thinking about that as it relates to the work that we do, and how it is aspirational, how it's both and, how it's a process of being and becoming and acknowledging that within ourselves and also with those around us.
So one of the things that Reverend Dr. Haynes talked about is the role of religion. I would expand that, say, faith practices and how it has been harmful. One of the things that the Religion Society program endeavors to do, to both look at the challenges as well as the opportunities. And in doing that, we have to recognize the complicity of where religion has done harm, but also champion and advocate where religion can add to the common good, and to serve Aspen's mission of creating a free, just, and equitable society. And so religion for all of us, as I've come to know all of you, really is a part of our identity.
Yes. Yeah.
It's a part of our identity. It's not something we just pick up on that whatever day of observance, but it's who we are. So invite a couple of you to speak to, in doing this project, how you were holding all the tensions that we have to acknowledge, and how your religious identity and the community show up in the world in ways of health and harm.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I can start. I've been wrestling with this a lot, of even having the audacity to think that we could re-narrate America. And would we want to? Given our religious traditions, for me, being a Christian and also being Asian gives me that outsider perspective to America that's actually freeing, that I can stand on the margins of America, speak prophetically to it, and not feel like I really belong, and not feel like I need to repent so much for America. And so it's this wrestling with, we have these higher callings, these higher allegiances, these transcendent common humanity identifications, but we're placed in America, so we have this responsibility since we're here.
Yeah.
And so for me, wrestling with why I need to speak to America, why I need to feel like I'm complicit with America, why I need to wrestle with restorative justice and moral repair. It's because this is where I feel like I've been called to and placed, and so I don't, depending on the elections, don't always want to be here. And so I think my religious tradition then gives me a different standpoint that helps both place me yet free me from that complicit, guilty, shamed position I feel a lot of times. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yes. Amazing. Go ahead.
Please.
Go. And I'll go next. Yeah.
Just to kind of also uplift a little bit more about Shoulder to Shoulder, we are a national multi-faith coalition of religious denominations and faith-rooted organizations who are working to counter anti-Muslim discrimination in the United States. And what I love and find valuable about this work is that, oftentimes in interfaith spaces, we're not acknowledging the power dynamics at play. We're not acknowledging how oftentimes the agenda is set for a certain audience. Thinking about those dynamics at play, and this was an example of solidarity, of coming together across difference to address a problem that many of our traditions have within them, our communities have within them. The purpose was to reach audiences, people of faith who are not Muslim, to understand anti-Muslim discrimination. And so in that essence, religion is infused in that project because our traditions aspire the best in us, call us to do this work together and make our country better.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I think for me, when I think about the role of religion in my world, I've always had a religious a connection to religion in some form. I think recently, probably over the last 5 to 7 years, I've really taken a deep dive into spirituality and using it as as an infrastructure for me to navigate the work that I do, fighting racial equity, diversity, fighting for diversity, equity, inclusion, and fighting against all forms of oppression, because I had gotten to a point where I was really stuck. And I was taking in a lot of what was happening in my work very personally. And so the pivot to be able to have a spiritual practice and a spiritual world was very freeing and liberating for me, and allowed me to stay in the work in the way that I needed to. And so that was really what drove me.
Okay. Well, our time is upon us, but I did want to, there were a few questions submitted. And so I want to ask one of that to honor the fact that we did ask you to submit a question. And we have some thinkers in the room, so here we are. The question that was submitted, and again, I invite those who want to answer, all four of you don't have to, but you're open to, is what, and I want to say this exactly how it was submitted.
Okay.
So be ready. What does the label of American mean to you?
I'll be quick. I'll say to wrestle. It for me to wrestle, to struggle, to understand that there's complexity and nuance involved with my identity as a person who is American.
Yeah, I mean, I think drawing from that wisdom is to have that conversation. And I'm fascinated by even the label term and words and how we have these different orientations. What we see depends on where we're standing. So we define and articulate ourselves from different locations. We and oftentimes in words, we've been talking about that, and words can be a source for understanding, or it can be also something that if we don't ask each other what we mean, can stop us from working together. So I think just having the conversation on what the question is.
I think to build off of what Yolanda said, I'm thinking about two things. One, I'm thinking about the philosopher Angela Y. Davis, who talks about how freedom is a constant struggle. And I think about being an American. I think it's a constant struggle because of my embodied blackness as a black woman. Because we're often and constantly othered, right? And hyphenated, right? And so we get the hyphen. So are you really American? One. Two, it's not until I leave America that I realize how American I am. Yeah. And so some of that hubris that comes along with being American comes along with me, even though here on this land tend to be marginalized, so it's not until I get out of the fishbowl, if you will, that I realize, oh, I'm more American than I thought, and more American than Americans tell me I am. So anyway, it's a constant struggle is what I would say, just to echo what you're saying.
Yeah, just add on to that. It is a fluid identity that we impute our own meaning to, that hopefully together we could actually impute better meaning to it.
Yeah. I appreciated that, and that's why I wanted to read it verbatim, because it mentions what does the label, and I think that has a lot of layers in it, in asking the question that way, but it also points for the amount of layers that I have to weed through to even see how I can put on that label and wear that label. If we're thinking about labels that are within clothing, do I fit within that label, or do I need to redefine a label, or is there really a label? And so I love there is a constant wrestling, and this project for me, it took me back to the Hebrew scriptures that talks about a crown of beauty coming out of the ashes. And so you get ashes because things are burned and disintegrated, but out of that ash, beauty can come because something can be reinvigorated, rebaked. And so for me we're creating a crown of beauty that eventually the label American can become. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I think we're going to move now to, yes. So we have three readers that are coming. Yep. All righty. Is that you? Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, I'll invite Rama and then Nicole and then Simran are going to be our final set of readers, and then we'll close out with the talkback. So Rama, Nicole, Simran will come up. Their bios will be on the screen, and then we'll have a chance for audiences for friends to ask any questions of them.
Okay, before I start reading, this was not planned, so we did not plot, like put that last question in because when I start reading, you're like, how are they weaving that all together? So I'm just saying it was not planned that way. Good afternoon, my name is Rama Abdul Alim. My middle name is Akila. It's a female name. Eid Mubarak for everybody who is celebrating. What does it mean to be an American? As I was leaving a country in the Middle East recently, the custom agent looked between me and my passport with confusion. My Muslim name does not follow the Arab tradition of first given name, the middle name being your father's first name, and then your family name. Their puzzlement faded away when they realized that I must not be Arab and thus not understand the Arab tradition. But my puzzlement began again when I came back from an overseas trip, and the U.S. Customs officer, after looking at my American passport, which clearly indicates that I was born in New York, still asked what country I was from. When I responded that I am an American, then they asked, how about your parents or grandparents? Where are they from? Was this the day I was going to pretend to be oblivious to the microaggression that comes along with being a woman with a Muslim name and a head covering and must thus be foreign? Or is this the day I will to respond, my people came over in slave ships, so the customs officer will know that I'm African American? This is the inner monologue that plays as you decide how to respond to those types of inquiries. Just like everyone else, you are exhausted from your travels, but you still need to jump over this last hurdle, the hurdle of proving that you are American enough. The imagery of running a race with multiple hurdles is an apt analogy of how it feels to be a Muslim woman with a head covering whose skin is just light enough to give the impression that maybe you're not African American. This experience, though, is not the sprint hurdles. This is more like the steeplechase race, where there are hurdles and water obstacles through which you have to overcome, which you have to power. Imagine the discomfort of standing at the terminal, getting additional questioning of who you are, when all of your non-Muslim friends with non-Muslim names can breeze right through customs with a smile and a welcome home. Your African-American Muslim friends who do not have Muslim last names, who somehow are looked at with the same head covering as just being Afrocentric African-American women instead of a scary foreign Muslim woman. You are standing, jet-lagged, trying to determine how much to explain about your family history. Is this the day you have to explain, yes, you were born in New York, and your mother was born in New York, and your grandmother was born in New York? If these types of experiences were just limited to non-Muslims, it would already be too much. But when it happens even more often in your small religious community, it becomes at times overwhelming. Muslims are a minority in the United States that too many Americans assume are all immigrants or children or grandchildren of immigrants. But that is nowhere near the full story of Muslims in America. Muslims have been in America from the very beginning, including, depending on the source, a significant number of the enslaved Africans. Writing on this underappreciated fact, Precious Rashida Muhammad says that people of Muslim heritage will come to number an estimated 15 to 30% of the American slave population over the course of slavery in colonial America and United States. But in the American Muslim community, African American Muslims are often viewed as not Muslim enough. It is something that I've been battling my entire life. In non-Muslim circles, I'm easily accepted as Muslim. But in Muslim circles, I have to fight to prove my Muslim identity. I find this unacceptable.
Good afternoon. I'm Nicole Presley. The title of my essay is Bearing Witness, Truth, Reclamation, and Meaning-Making in Contested American Narratives. Our identity is intricately woven with the narratives that circumscribe our culture, its systems, its institutions, its politics, and its values. Narrative serves as a vital conduit through which we transmit culture and make sense of our existence in the world. Thus, narratives shaping an American identity rooted in histories of injustice and dominance are at best incomplete, or at worst perpetuate the cultural norms that breed such injustices. Concepts such as American exceptionalism, a nation of immigrants, a doctrine of discovery, all contribute to shaping the material and existential conditions of our present reality through narratives that either distort or uphold historical truths. So what can we really do for each other except just love each other and be each other's witness? And haven't we got the right to hope for more, so that we can really stretch into whoever we really are? James Baldwin, Another Country. To get to the root of these issues, we need a process to grapple collectively with the histories and narratives that have produced our current condition. As James Baldwin suggests, the radical act that may offer a lasting solution to this crisis is deeply rooted in religious practice, bearing witness. In Baldwin's perspective, bearing witness entails loving one another by recognizing our shared humanity. It requires opening ourselves to truth and stories that have been overlooked or manipulated, and bravely forging a new relationship grounded in a mandate of loving mutuality and care. America, collectively, must bear witness to the truth of its history and our current political tensions in order to craft a more honest and just narrative of our national identity. But what about you, he asked. Who do you say I am? Jesus, Matthew 16:15. Bearing witness necessitates both acknowledging truth and taking public, often political action. For example, Jesus' defiance of the status quo posed a threat to the Roman Empire, ultimately leading to his execution. Being a follower of Jesus thus meant embracing risk and challenging power, as exemplified in the story of Peter's denial. Peter privately acknowledged Jesus' true identity, but when faced with the consequences of this public acknowledgement, denied him. This illustrates that true witness requires us to go beyond knowing the truth or declaring it only when it is politically expedient. Bearing witness requires us to act with integrity and resist being complicit in the oppression of others. It may call on us to confront senators proposing legislation that denies health care to those in need. It may call on us to withdraw our financial support from businesses that violate environmental policy. It may require welcoming our neighbors across borders, rematriation of land, and redistribution of resources. There is always risk when speaking truth to power, yet this very radical act is essential to co-authoring a story that can liberate us all. Bearing witness binds us together. It moves us into an understanding of our interdependence without forsaking our values or our neighbors. The question of who we are and the risks that we are willing or unwilling to take to be who that we say we are has been the primary preoccupation of our current political context. The Narrative Initiative, born out of the deepening political divides following the 2016 elections, supports social change ecosystems by equipping movements with narrative techniques to connect, and mobilize people across differences and at the level of values. Their WAVES model posits narrative as a bridge between those stories we tell about ourselves and the stories that we tell about the world and the values that we hold. It gives us a method to critically engage our current social and political condition through bridging our values and context in ways that generate stories capable of guiding our actions into better alignment with our most liberatory values. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. If racism wasn't so damaging and it didn't cause us so much pain, I might look at it from a distance and laugh. What sense does any of this make? How could color and pigmentation indicate human value? I understand how racism has developed, how it's adapted historically. I also understand how people used race and racism to ascertain power for their own purposes. As illogical as it might feel, these are logics that we can all follow. What I wonder, though, is what would our world look like if we didn't take racism for granted? How could someone who was not socialized in a racist culture understand the diversity of humanity all around them? I ask these questions in service of a larger question. How might we reimagine and redesign our society in a way that helps us realize the founding ideals of the United States of America, such as liberty and justice for all? We're steeped in our cultural milieu, which means it can be hard to imagine ways of thinking beyond it. I found that sometimes when I'm too close to something, the best way to innovate is to try and step outside of it. That's why, in my aim to develop a new vision for the U.S., I've turned to the religious tradition that informs my worldview. Sikhi, which I would describe as anti-racist, anti-sexist, and most generally anti-hierarchy. At a time when we struggle to deal with the differences among us and all around us, Sikhi offers a model for creating a more open, inclusive, and loving culture. The Sikh philosophical system is built on the ideas of oneness and connection. The first term in scripture is Ik Onkar, which refers to the oneness of all creation, and as Bhagat Kabir writes, if all humans come from the same light, how can we call someone good or bad? His quotation demonstrates a different way of looking at the world from what we know typically. We worry about discerning the good from the bad, judging people as good or evil, and our discernment often depends on how we see ourselves. Those who are more like us deserve our respect. Those who are different from us do not. What if we approached human diversity like Bhagat Kabir, understanding that the starting point is our shared divinity? Wouldn't that change how we treat everything and everyone all around us? Thank you.
Thank you, Simram, Rama, and Nicole. We'll do a brief talk back where friends in the audience can ask any questions. And maybe I'll just start us off to give you guys a chance to think. And just ask, part of this project was trying to think about how to take spiritual teachings and principles and make them relevant to a broader conversation about social transformation and imagining a new way in America. So just wanted to ask you what your thought process was about choosing the spiritual principles or teachings you chose to incorporate into your essay, and how you thought you could make those relevant to a broader conversation.
Why? Really? This is why. You should not accept it. That actually was not part of the essay that I read, but there was a verse from the Holy Quran that I always go back to when asked to talk about interfaith issues. And it's about God making you into tribes so that you can know one another. I'm paraphrasing. Mm-hmm. Please don't say that's what I'm paraphrasing. If you put those in and say Holy Quran, you'll find the verse. But I think that was really my starting point, and then trying to figure out how do we talk about that, because it's something that I often think about, because we are in ways so similar, but in ways so different, and realizing that there had to be a greater plan of why we're so different. And so really just kind of expressing what I feel as an African American Muslim woman and sharing that in order to kind of show some common humanity with other people. And I think that that is something that is often missing in our dialogue, is that we don't see each other's common humanity, we see each other's differences. And by focusing on the differences, that causes the tension. Whereas if we thought of each other as like, they grew in their mother's womb for 9 months too. Like if we go back to that level, instead of saying, their mother ate something different than my mother ate, and I don't know. So, like going back to that commonality, I think was very important for me when I was writing the essay.
What was the question again?
Just the process you went through in choosing what spiritual teachings or principles and how to make them applicable.
Well, what I kept going back to, I was raised, my father was Baptist, my mother was Seventh-day Adventist. It was always a good time. And I would be reminded how they would choose the same stories to tell, right, when we would have like family Bible study. And while then when I went to their different churches, there's different interpretations, right, of a lot of the stories they would tell. But when we were at home, there was one unified story. And I think how that influenced what I brought to my essay is that a presentation of events, right? Like that's to me how I would define a story. But a narrative are the choices that you make in telling the story. Where do you start? Who do you want to focus on? And that is why I believe that, for better and for worse, as we have seen, religion, right, has a goal, has a project, often political, right? You can't help but to be political when you're saying, here's what morality is in a context of immorality, right? And so I was just thinking about who are the people, right, preaching the good news? Who are the people telling these stories? And what is the project that they have in mind for you as they're telling them? I know that my parents had a particular project in mind, mostly my care and thriving, probably some of their other, hopes and dreams for me. Hopefully I've satisfied that. But then I think of how has religion used to create a project? Is that project our collective thriving, or is it something else? And I think that is where narrative really comes into play, and that's kind of what I was sitting with as I was writing.
Thank you. I sort of have a meshing of your two experiences, and I'll say when what I shared was almost a meditation of the questions that framed the essay for me. I didn't get into the principles themselves, which I share later in the essay, but from the questions you all asked us as contributors, you and Selvi and Audrey and Ekemini, as you asked it to me, and my experience of them was these questions feel resonant, but I'm not really sure where I want to go with this in terms of my own tradition and how nobody had ever asked me, if you could change the story of America, how would you do it, right? So it's a really interesting creative project, and it gave me a chance to sort of reflect on my tradition. And I'll tell you what I ended up writing about was a composition that I'd known for most of my life, but I'd never really spent much time with. And as I was reading it, it was sort of helping me rethink what could be possible in our society. And one of the lines, the first line that really stuck out to me is, it's, to your point about the shared oneness, it's we always in our conversation around diversity are dancing around that tension between individual identity and distinctiveness as opposed to our shared humanity and connectedness. And this line talks about how in the ocean there are waves and there's bubbles and there's foam, and all of them exist, but also they're all still part of the ocean. And so what does it mean to do a both and say it's not just me against you, but it's also not just me erased because of you. It's sort of like I exist and we all exist, and how do we do that at the same time? And so that was a really powerful reflection for me, and that's sort of why I ended up writing about this essay, or about this composition. Thank you.
Thank you all. Yeah, maybe we have time for just one question from the audience for these friends, if there is one. Yeah, Abby.
Thank you. Sorry, I hope it's okay if I ask a question. So when I was listening to and reading all of your excerpts, they were really powerful. And specifically with Nicole, one thing that stood out to me when I was reading yours and thinking about bearing witness was this poem that I had read. And it goes, first they came for the socialist, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionist, and he continues talking about himself not speaking out. The final line ends with, then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. And to me, this is such a powerful poem because it discusses this idea of bearing witness and how important it is not just to speak for ourselves, especially like you were talking about when it is politically expedient, but it makes me think about what we've seen today. And I think about, the consequences of people speaking out, seeing people's faces being posted on buses and driven around school, being lost, losing job opportunities. And I wonder, is it up to us to consider the consequences of how we speak out and still speak out? Or is it up to us to change this environment that we're speaking out in and try to create an environment where it's possible to speak out without these consequences? And I sort of wonder what's the connection of that also to spirituality and what's its importance to you? Thank you.
Big, beautiful question, Abby. Yeah, I don't know if anyone wants to.
Yes, I have heard that poem as well. I will give you an answer that I was actually talking to Reverend Harvey about earlier today, which is I am also the daughter of union members, and there's great risk in organized labor. And a part of the union is, in fact, you said, I forgot the first part, but you're like, is it creating conditions? And I'm like, yes, it's creating conditions to me. Unions have created the conditions, to allow people to take risks, to not say there will be no consequences, but to say we will try our best to protect you from those consequences. We will have a fund that you can pull from. They build relationships of care where people are making sure their kids are fed and that, oh, you watch the kids now, I got to go to the picket line. People in the community come out and support them. And so I think that one of the biggest strengths that religion has had is being a part of communities that are resisting and saying there's a soft place to land, that we still care about you, that no matter who you are and where you come from, that there is a place for you here that will recognize your inherent worth and dignity. Sometimes we do that very well. Sometimes we don't. But I don't think that we can ever guarantee that there will be no consequences. We can only create through our faithfulness and application, the idea that we can maybe soften some of those. And very quickly, I want to say, I love that poem. And I think that is just the start. Knowing that somebody, if they get through these 5 other identities, they'll get to you, that is still self-preservation. They're just a little more strategic. Mm-hmm. I actually think that we need to figure out how we feel like our identities, our ability to be human ourselves is bound up in the other person. Mm-hmm. That's where we need to go.
Yeah.
I would just say that to your question, it's about changing the narrative too. Because even earlier when they were talking about James Baldwin and the cowboy, and it's part of the issue that we're having here in America now is that as the narratives are changing and the heroes and villains are changing, some people who used to be heroes are now finding out about kind of villainous behavior of their ancestors and don't want to hear about that. They want to just hear about the hero journey. And the people who've always been villains are like, it's our turn to be heroes. Mm-hmm. And it's really that tension that we're dealing with. And maybe trying to kind of reimagine that we don't always have to have stories with heroes and villains, and we can only have one story. And I think that that's where we have to get to, because the heroes don't want to give up being heroes. They don't want to hear about any bad behavior, and they want to recreate and reimagine it wasn't that bad. Civil War wasn't about slavery, and they were happy. And, well, all of that kind of reimagining because you don't want to hear about any kind of systemic racism. So it's really trying to change the story so that everybody can be heroes and that no one has to be villains. Because the story that we've lived with so long has been heroes over here and someone has to be the villain. And the villain is usually some person of color.
I'll just say two things very quickly. One is somebody said earlier, do the right thing and the law will follow. Raise your hand. Who is that? Yeah, Dr. Haynes. Okay, that's right when I walked in. I mean, I think that's part of your question at the end was, what does spirituality have to do with this? I think in the best examples I know about what religion looks like, it's that, and leading with courage, right? Recognizing what the right thing is and then being able to model for people what that looks like. And so I think that's part of the culture shift that we can be thinking about in this room. And the other dimension to that, and it's a question that I've been thinking about recently, is we often ask ourselves what the consequences are of speaking up, but then we don't ask ourselves what are the consequences of not speaking up, and what compromises we make internally to our own beings and to one another that really cost us. And those don't make it into our calculus. And I think asking that question is a really important practice for us to start bringing into culture now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Simran, Rama, and Nicole. As you can tell, we had a very rich, dynamic program with many pieces to it, and we've kind of come up with time, and we didn't have a chance to do something we really wanted to do with you, but I'll just mention it. So in your chair, there is this table talk discussion, and these are the questions that were posed to the contributors. And, why does this project matter, right? Why? And I think part of this is our office is really interested in learning about how language can grow and evolve into something new. I was reminded when I was a freshman in college, I took a poetry class, and my professor held up a mug, and he said, poetry is the act of describing what is on the other side of this mug that we can't see. And for me, it's taken me 20 years to process this, and I think that's the work of this project, is trying to describe things that we cannot see that we know exist. And that's the beauty of this space, too, is also merging that with spiritual principles, whether you call it scripture, the word of God, right? Merging this with the beauty of the human mind and experience and trying to create and bring forth into existence something different. So that's why this project really matters. And so we've asked these contributors to come in, but as Selvia said, we really want you to be part of this conversation. And so that's, for anyone who is interested, we were going to break out and have you guys share your thoughts about these, but you can visit this QR code. There's a form where you can submit your thoughts on these questions, share them with us. We would love to hear your reflections. So we'll table the table talk until another time, until online spaces, but thank you very much for coming, and I'll turn it over to Audrey for some closing remarks.
All right. Yes, and I also want to mention that that site will stay live, so you don't have to input and answer the questions right now, but in a day or two or even 2 months from now, please visit and input those, and then both organizations, the Office of Public Affairs, Bahá'í, as well as the Religious Society Program, will mull those questions over as we continue with this project in many ways. I'll end with this. Why do we have the Racial Justice and Religion Collective, and what makes us different? And I believe what makes us different and the why for us is there is a lot of meaningful interfaith, multi-faith, interreligious work that is happening. Our work is different. We invite a variety of people from different faith traditions, Baha'i, Sikh, Islam, Jewish, Christian, and the tapestry of Christianity, Universal Unitarian, Indigenous, Asian American Pacific Islander, those who identify as female, identify as male, same gender loving, all gather to sit comfortably in their difference. It is not our goal at all to bridge or to change difference, but to sit comfortably in those differences and model for this United States of America that those who might have some differences do and can and will come together in shared common values to push against this whole narrative that difference is deficient. But difference is a dynamic that can and will transform us into who we say we are, because I believe we are not there yet. And so that's what makes us different, is that we're not trying to bridge or change or assimilate. We are showing the beautiful tapestry of what can be offered when people look into the faces of another human being and affirm and respect that human dignity without that person have to justify and explain who they are. Today also marks, I believe, an important part in transition in the program. We are joined virtually by Meryl Chertoff, who started this program as the Inclusive America Project in her visioning of the religious pluralism. She is on virtually. And today we have a passing of the baton from our Executive Director, Simran Jeet Singh, to our incoming Executive Director, Josh Good. I would like for us to give a round of applause and appreciation for the work that Simran has done in this program. And then I invite Josh and Nicole to just come stand up here as a team. There's so much church in me, so we always come together. Because this is your Religion and Society program. And we all come together to say thank you for taking the journey thus far, and thank you for the ways in which you will journey forward with us. Because we have done a great work here, but we still have a great work to do. Thank you. All right. Our contributors are available for the next 10, 15 minutes to mix and mingle, and then there's a group that will be gathering and will need to leave with me within the next 10 minutes. Thank you so much for coming.